Have you ever wondered, why do you still feel lost, even though everything on the outside seems fine? Why does the inner noise grow louder the more you chase the world? Jung said that the tragedy of modern man is believing that others' recognition is the unit of measure for one's own value. And Jung also believed that within each person lies both light and shadow, both mask and true self. And the most sacred duty of life is to turn attention inward, to begin the journey of individuation, the journey to become oneself. Focusing on oneself is not selfishness. It is a ritual of self-responsibility. Because if you do not control your own attention, others will control it for you. And the important thing is, you only truly change when you begin to understand your own depths, when you learn to discipline the mind, cleanse emotions, choose silence over noise. Then you no longer flee from the world. You stand firm in it, with a clear, serene, and self-possessed energy. In today's video, I will guide you through 3 doors: shadow, archetype, and individuation. Each door opens a piece of the secret operating your life. Once understood, you cannot unsee them. Are you ready to turn the key? Number 1. Stop running. Look into the shadow within yourself. Have you ever realized that most of the time in life we spend fleeing from ourselves? Not from others, not from the world, but from our own selves. We flee through work, through relationships, through mindless scrolling on the phone, through false busyness to avoid facing the inner void. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That statement is a direct slash into the illusion in which most of us are living. The shadow in Jung is not evil, not something wicked that needs to be eradicated. It is the forgotten part of the soul, everything you have ever denied, suppressed, or hidden out of fear of judgment, hurt, or rejection. Every time you say, "That's not me," a part of you is being pushed into the shadow. When you envy but pretend to be fine, when you rage but smile to keep the peace, when you crave recognition but feign indifference, you are feeding your shadow. And that shadow does not disappear. It stands there, patient, waiting for the chance to speak. The shadow in Jungian psychology is like the underwater base of an iceberg. We only live on the tip, the image we want others to see, the socially acceptable persona. But the submerged part below, the fears, the rages, the desires, the inferiorities, that is what steers the entire iceberg's drift. The more you try to hide it, the more power it holds. The more you avoid it, the more it rises in subtler forms. Burnout, anxiety, self-doubt, conflicts, toxic relationships. Jung called the process of confronting the shadow an indispensable step of individuation, the journey to becoming a whole person. Because the shadow is also where your most vital life energy resides: passion, creativity, intuition, instinctual power. When you suppress anger, you do not just block the rage, you block the ability to assert yourself. When you deny fear, you lose the sensitivity that helps you detect danger. When you try to be kind all the time, you kill your own capacity to say no. That is why Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The sooner you accept that within you there is both light and shadow, the closer you come to the truth. It is not a comfortable journey. Sometimes it makes you doubt yourself, makes you feel ashamed for realizing you are more selfish, petty, and vulnerable than you thought. But remember, the shadow does not weaken you. Denying the shadow is what weakens you. A practical way to understand the shadow is to look at the people you hate or the behaviors that irritate you most in others. Jung called this projection. You only recognize in others what you yourself are suppressing within. If someone bothers you because they boast, perhaps deep down you crave recognition. If you despise weakness in others, perhaps the weak part in you is crying out to be acknowledged. In this way, the outer world is merely a mirror, and the emotions you react to are the shadow within knocking at the door. The problem is that people fear their own shadow more than anything else. We fear losing the good image, fear touching the ugly part labeled as such by society. But it is precisely honesty with the shadow that opens the door to true healing. In Jung's analytical therapy, many people only begin to revive when they dare to voice what they have hidden all their life. I envy my best friend. I hate the very job I once dreamed of. Those confessions do not destroy them. On the contrary, they release the energy they had spent maintaining the mask. You cannot see the stars if you do not step into the night. The shadow is not the enemy of light. It is the backdrop against which light appears. Likewise, the shadow part in you is the raw material that needs to be recognized, forged, and transformed. The person who has never confronted their shadow has a light that is merely artificial, dazzling on the outside, but hollow within. So how to begin? No need to meditate in deep mountains or read all of Jung's books. Start with the smallest things. When a negative emotion rises, do not rush to suppress it. Ask yourself, where does it come from? What do I truly need? What am I afraid of? Write it down, observe it like observing a crying child. When you observe without judgment, the shadow begins to melt. When you recognize it, the energy stuck in the unconscious begins to be released, turning into fuel for growth. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But to become yourself, you must pass through the land of shadow. No one can walk that path for you. It is a journey of courage to look in the mirror and not turn away. When you stop running and turn back to face it, you not only find peace, you reclaim your inner power. For at that point, you are no longer directed by the unconscious. You become the driver, the creator, the architect of your fate. Number 2. Decoding the archetypes that are ruling your life. When you have gathered enough courage to look into your own shadow, you will begin to realize something even deeper. Invisible forces are moving within you, nameless hands that quietly guide how you love, how you choose, how you fear, and even how you live. Jung called these forces archetypes. If the shadow is your hidden part, then the archetype is the spiritual skeleton that structures your entire inner world, shaping every behavior, emotion, and decision, whether you realize it or not. Imagine your soul as a stage. On the surface, it seems you are the lead actor, but behind the curtain, countless characters are whispering. The mother, the warrior, the savior, the victim, the abandoned child, the betrayer. Each archetype carries an ancient energy, a pattern of behavior inherited through thousands of generations. Jung believed these archetypes exist in the collective unconscious, a layer deeper than the personal unconscious, where humanity shares common memories and images. No matter where you were born or what culture you belong to, within you there is still a hero waiting to fight, a child needing love, a mother wanting to nurture, and a shadow challenging you. You might think, I am free. I choose my own way of living. But the truth is, most of the time, it is the archetypes choosing for you. Recall those moments when you say, I don't understand why I keep falling for that type of person, or I know I'll regret it, but I do it anyway. That is not weakness. It is an archetype temporarily taking control. When the victim rules, you live in helplessness, blame, and always feel victimized. When the savior speaks, you try to fix and rescue everyone, even forgetting yourself. When the warrior rises, you work relentlessly, straining to fight for goals, but forget how to stop. The danger is that most of us live in the grip of archetypes without knowing it. We think it is personality, but really, it is a role unconsciously chosen. And when we cling to one role too long, we lose the flexibility to transform. Jung once wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you cannot become yourself if you are still living as a supporting character in a play scripted by the unconscious." Do you recognize it? Some people always find themselves in damaging relationships. They meet cold, distant people, then suffer from abandonment. They do not realize that the abandoned child within them is quietly choosing partners like their parents once were, to repeat the familiar script in the hope that this time the ending will be different. But the ending is never different until they realize who is rewriting that story from the shadows. If reading this, you recognize the role taking over your stage, leave a sign in the comments, a keyword, a symbol, or a two-line story so we can name it together and start the dialogue. Archetypes are not enemies. They are the language of the soul. Each archetype appears to help you learn a necessary lesson for spiritual evolution. But if you let one archetype dominate the stage, it will turn into shadow. The one too attached to the mother becomes controlling. The one too immersed in the hero becomes arrogant. The one too embodied in the savior becomes a victim of their own sacrifices. And this is precisely why Jung emphasized, we are possessed by the archetypes. When unidentified, we are puppets. When we begin to observe, we become directors. When we learn to integrate, we become creators. We are not defined by the archetypes, but use their energy consciously. Modern psychology confirms this through the concept of schema, psychological patterns formed from childhood experiences and cultural unconscious. Someone raised in strictness often develops a perfectionist schema. Someone abandoned has a victim schema. These schemas are like background software, automatically triggering emotional reactions you cannot control. But when we bring the light of awareness to them, we can reprogram the system by understanding and choosing new responses. Imagine you are the director of your life's movie. If you do not know how many actors are inside you, they will control you. But if you recognize, this is the warrior wanting to fight, or the child feeling afraid, you can smile and say, "Thank you, I know. Now I will choose differently." Then, you no longer live passively, but actively, awake and full of power. But the process of decoding archetypes is not just analysis, it is empathy with oneself. You cannot integrate what you hate. If you see the betrayer within as something evil to eliminate, you will forever live in conflict. But if you see that the betrayer is just the part afraid of hurt, you will understand why it exists. With that understanding, you reclaim the severed energy. Because ultimately, true freedom is not doing everything you want, but knowing who is wanting within you and choosing to act from your wisest part. When you understand the archetypes, you not only understand yourself, you begin to understand the whole world. And that is when you ascend another step on the journey home. From the unconsciously controlled person to the awakened one who creates their own life. Number 3. Liberating from the collective unconscious. Not everyone walks the same path as you. When you begin to recognize the archetypes operating within you, you will soon arrive at an even deeper discovery. There are beliefs, habits, standards, and emotions that you think belong to yourself. But in reality, they do not belong to you at all. They are products of the collective unconscious, the vast psychological current where every human, over thousands of years, has left traces of fears, dreams, and standards of living. You do not carry only personal memories within you. You carry in your heart the memories of all humanity. Jung called it the invisible deep layer that connects us all through the same system of symbols, beliefs, and behavioral patterns. Look at social media, a living testament to the power of the modern collective unconscious. There, millions of people chase the same template: the ideal body, early success, self-love, as a pre-packaged formula. People think they are freely choosing, but really, they are just repeating the same story. That uniformity makes us safe, but it also steals individuality, distancing us from the true self. Liberating from the collective unconscious does not mean rebelling or rejecting society. It means awakening, recognizing what the voice of the community is and what the voice of the self is. In fact, loneliness is inevitable when you begin to separate from the collective unconscious. Like the first bird daring to leave the flock, you will be misunderstood, judged, and labeled as strange. Because most of the world does not encourage awakening, it encourages repetition. But only when you dare to stand outside that loop do you truly begin to see. Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. That is the loneliness of one who is growing, separating from the herd, to become oneself." Think of those who dare to go against, artists mocked as eccentric, thinkers once deemed mad, individuals choosing ways of life different from the majority. At first, they are ostracized, but they are the ones who pave the way. You too. There will come a time when you realize that not everyone walks the same path as you, and that is perfectly fine. Each soul has its own rhythm, its own lessons. Trying to drag others along only disorients you. Liberating from the collective unconscious is learning to separate the noise from intuition. Every time you make a decision, pause and ask yourself, is this truly what I want, or just what society taught me to want? That question seems simple, but if you answer honestly, you will be surprised to realize that most of what you are pursuing, fame, career, even love, is the result of collective programming, not of your soul. From a psychological perspective, when we are born, our ego has no distinct shape. It forms by absorbing beliefs and behaviors from parents, society, religion, and culture. But at a certain point, if you do not learn to redefine yourself, you will live as a copy of others. Jung called it the disorder of assimilation, when people suffer without understanding why, because their soul is stifled in a mold not meant for them. Just as a seed cannot sprout if it tries to become a leaf, a person cannot grow if they keep trying to become a version of the collective. Each soul carries within it a unique blueprint, a personal archetype waiting to be activated. And only when you dare to leave the collective flow do you hear that blueprint clearly. That is when you stop asking, "What do others think of me?" and begin asking, "Who am I truly?" Jung once said, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." So, to live authentically, you must accept walking barefoot on your own path, rough but real. And that is also when you discover freedom does not lie in being able to do everything, but in daring not to do what others expect. Liberating from the collective unconscious is not a rebellion against the world, but loyalty to your own soul. It is when you have the courage not to need anyone to understand you, the stillness to hear yourself, and the strength to stand alone without feeling lonely. Then, you are no longer a product of the world. You become the creator of your own world. And that is also the turning point of Jung's awakening journey, when you realize that no one can walk with you forever. Some paths only open when you walk them alone. Not everyone understands you, nor do they need to, because this journey is not to be accepted, but to return to the truest self, where the collective unconscious no longer holds you captive, and your soul breathes freely for the first time after so long. Number 4. Individuation, the journey of self-creation. When you have dared to separate yourself from the flow of the collective unconscious, you will begin to stand on empty ground, where only you remain, and the silent call of the soul. It is precisely there that the journey of individuation begins. Jung called this the ultimate goal of human life, to become the person you were born to be. Not the version society expects, not the shadow of anyone else, but a whole self, where the light and shadow within you are unified, where the fragmented parts of the soul find harmony. Individuation is not a process of adding, but of peeling away and removing what does not belong to you. Like sculpture, the sculptor does not create the form by adding clay, but by chiseling away the excess to reveal the shape hidden inside. Likewise, you do not become someone else. You only remove layers of pretense to rediscover the original essence already within you. In the journey of individuation, one must confront and reconcile the inner opposites, reason and emotion, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, instinct and spirit. We often choose one side, trying to be rational, trying to be good, trying to be strong or gentle. But Jung pointed out that wholeness only comes when we accept both sides. A person only truly matures when they no longer try to become good, but dare to recognize their own dark side and learn to manage it rather than deny it. In life, individuation manifests in those moments when you dare to be honest with yourself, even if it leads to misunderstanding. It is when you choose the path your heart knows is right, even if others deem it wrong. It is when you stop living to be loved and begin living to become lovable in your own eyes. That is the shift from being accepted to being real. Jungian psychology views individuation as the process of drawing consciousness and unconsciousness closer, so that the two worlds no longer oppose, but collaborate. One path Jung suggested for practicing this is working with dreams. Dreams are not meaningless images, but messages from the unconscious, where the soul speaks in symbols. When you record your dreams without judgment and listen, you are dialoguing with your deepest part. A dream of a snake may be a reminder of rebirth. a dream of falling into an abyss, a signal of letting go, a dream of meeting a stranger, or an image of the part of you yet unrecognized. By observing and reflecting, you begin to familiarize yourself with the language of the soul. Another method is active imagination, the technique Jung developed to communicate with the unconscious. Instead of mere daydreaming, you close your eyes and let your mind produce images, then dialogue with them. For example, if you see a figure in imagination, a child, an old person, a frightening shadow, ask it, "Who are you? What do you want me to know?" This dialogue is not superstition, but a process of recognizing the unconscious parts needing to be heard. Jung believed that when you can talk to the shadow stops controlling you. Individuation also occurs through small daily actions when you dare to choose what aligns with yourself, not habit. When you say no to what your heart does not want, when you pause amid the noise to hear your own voice, when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, when you do not need to prove anything to anyone, that is when the process of individuation is unfolding quietly. It has no fireworks, no applause, but bit by bit, you feel wholeness germinating within. What is interesting is that this process does not lead you to happiness in the ordinary sense. Jung did not promise eternal peace. On the contrary, he said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Individuation is the journey of accepting the truth. You are not omnipotent, not purely good, and not invincible. But in acknowledging those limits, you find a genuine strength, the strength that comes from humility and understanding. Psychologically, individuation is not an upward journey, but an inward one, from the outer world to the inner, from the small ego to the greater self. It is a transformation of perception, where you stop viewing life through the eyes of the crowd, but through the inner eye, where intuition, wisdom, and stillness become one. Then you no longer seek answers outside, because you realize all answers already lie within you, waiting only to be awakened. And perhaps the deepest truth about individuation is, you do not create yourself. You return to yourself. Like a seed does not learn to become a tree, it only needs the right soil, the right water, and light will do the rest. You too. When you learn to listen to the call from the depths, when you respect the natural process of the soul, when you stop racing with others, you will see yourself unfold naturally, without force. That is the deepest meaning of the journey Jung outlined. Self-creation is not by becoming someone else, but by remembering who you have always been. And if you are still journeying with us to this point, thank you sincerely, because only those who dare to go into the depths of themselves can stay until the end of a journey like this. However, the journey of individuation does not end here. It has only just opened, and another stretch awaits ahead. Learning to keep the flame of awakening through discipline, and learning to live alone without loneliness. If today's words touch you, leave a small sign with a follow, a channel subscription, or simply keep this place in your list as a space to return to when you need to reconnect with your deepest part. Number 5. Discipline, the necessary sacrifice for true freedom. Nevertheless, Jung emphasized that there is no true freedom without passing through the gate of discipline. It is the thread that holds you steady amid the winds of desire, habit, procrastination, and inner chaos. Jung subtly reminds us that you need the discipline of awakening, the ability to compel yourself to repeat the actions necessary for growth, even when motivation fades. The discipline Jung spoke of is not a rigid framework or tyrannical self-control. It is loyalty to your own soul, a commitment to living authentically even when it demands a price. If individuation is the journey to becoming oneself, then discipline is the energy that sustains that journey amid a reality full of temptations and distractions. Because freedom without discipline sooner or later becomes chaos. Just like music, the pauses, the rhythmic frames, and the invisible laws are what create the melody. Discipline does not stifle freedom. It shapes freedom. In today's world, freedom is often misunderstood as doing whatever one wants. But Jung would say that is merely an immature instinct. True freedom does not lie in chasing desires, but in the ability to choose consciously. And to choose consciously, you must have discipline, the capacity to pause, observe, and not be swept away by momentary impulses. A person without discipline is like a boat without a rudder, drifting wherever the strongest wind blows, rather than to where they want to go. Think of a morning when you wake up and feel like doing nothing at all. The instinctual part in you will say, "Rest, you can do it tomorrow." But the disciplined part, the one you have forged over months and years, will say, "No, stick to the plan." And in the very moment you heed that second voice, you are training your spiritual will, the part that Jung saw as the tool to help humanity keep consciousness from being swallowed by the unconscious. Discipline in Jungian psychology is not coercion against oneself, but unity between will and instinct. When you learn to direct instinctual energy, desires, ambitions, and emotions to serve a deeper purpose, you are no longer split between the wild self and the moral self. You begin to feel harmony between those inner opposites. That is a higher form of freedom. Freedom not from rules, but from the slavery of instinct. Recall those who have achieved something great. No one among them lived without discipline. Whether artist, warrior, or spiritual teacher, all understood one principle. Greatness does not come from inspiration, but from conscious repetition. Inspiration is the spark, but discipline is the flame that keeps the light from going out. The writer does not wait for inspiration to pick up the pen. They write to summon inspiration. The practitioner does not wait for a calm mind to meditate. They meditate to become calm. Discipline is the action that rises above emotion. And perhaps here I want to pause for a moment to ask you, if there is one thing you want to persist with, even if no one sees, no one praises, even when you are so tired you only want to let go, what is it? Pause this video and give yourself a few serious minutes to think about the answer. Then, you can write it down in the comments as a commitment to yourself. I choose discipline. Who knows, your small story might be the spark that makes someone else choose not to give up. From a spiritual perspective, discipline is the daily ritual to keep you connected to your soul. It might be journaling each morning to illuminate yourself, meditating for 15 minutes to observe the mind, or walking in silence to listen to the inner voice. Whatever the form, the common thread is, you are present and there with yourself. In a world of distraction, that is a revolutionary act. Each time you sit still amid the chaos, you are affirming, I am the master of my consciousness. Jung believed discipline is also a form of sacrifice. In mythology, every transformative ritual comes with sacrifice. Humans must relinquish something to reach a new level of consciousness. In modern life, Sacrifice is no longer blood or offerings, but letting go of habits that weaken the soul, procrastination, judgment, and compromise with mediocrity. Discipline is daring to say no to what is easy, to say yes to what is necessary for growth. And it is precisely in those quiet refusals that you restore your spiritual power. But be careful, discipline is not self-flagellation. Discipline does not arise from guilt, but from love. You do not maintain it out of fear of failure, but because you know you deserve the fruits of effort. When you exercise not to hate your body, but to love it. When you learn not out of fear of ignorance, but to honor your intellectual potential, that is discipline born from self-love awareness. Jung once said, "What you resist persists." Discipline is not resisting instinct, but transforming it into creative energy. One of the greatest challenges of discipline is maintaining it in silence. No one applauds you for waking up early, and no one knows how many temptations you have refused to stay on your path. But it is precisely those invisible moments that forge the real you. When you live with discipline, you begin to recognize the paradox Jung always emphasized. Limitation is the foundation of freedom. Just as a river can only flow strongly when bounded by two banks, a person can only realize potential when they set clear boundaries for themselves. Each time you keep a promise to yourself, you strengthen your psychological structure, the solid foundation for the soul to create freely without fear of collapse. I have a small challenge for you in the next 24 hours. It could be as simple as 10 minutes of exercise, 5 minutes of journaling, or 10 minutes sitting still with yourself. Then, come back here and leave a line. I kept my word. That is the quiet vow you make to yourself. Number 6. True power is knowing how to live alone without loneliness. When discipline becomes the rhythm of living, you will recognize a subtler, more difficult challenge: learning to be alone. After all the layers of false self have fallen away, after you no longer need the crowd to validate your worth, you step into a silence where there is no more applause, no more admiring glances. That is the land of mature solitude, where your soul is tested in its ability to stand firm without clinging. There is a vast difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the feeling of being left behind, cut off from connection. Solitude is the voluntary turning inward to connect more deeply with oneself. Loneliness is emptiness while waiting for others to fill it. Solitude is fullness when you learn to fill it yourself with your own presence. And that is the starting point of true inner power. In today's world, we are taught how to communicate, collaborate, and share, but rarely how to be alone without fear. We see being alone as failure, as proof of lack. The one who has never lived alone will always be dependent. They seek love to avoid emptiness, work to avoid meaninglessness, noise to fill the space of silence. But Jung emphasized that it is precisely in stillness that one begins to hear the most primordial voice, the voice of the self. Jung regarded solitude as an essential phase of the individuation process. After separating from the collective unconscious, the soul needs time to restructure. Like a snake shedding its skin, it must retreat to a safe, silent place before returning with a new form. Rebirth is impossible while immersed in the crowd. You cannot hear the soul's whisper if the mind is still besieged by the world's noise. Indeed, only those who dare to be alone are truly strong, because they no longer need others to affirm their existence. They do not fear silence because they have turned silence into a companion. They do not seek attention because they have found peace in not needing to be seen. In that stillness, the soul's energy begins to regenerate, like soil after winter, quietly gathering nutrients to prepare for a new blooming season. Observe those who are truly at peace. They do not need many relationships, but wherever they go, they carry an energy that makes others feel safe. Because they have passed through the fear of loneliness and conquered it. They do not need others to fill them, because they are already full. They love not to be saved, but to share their wholeness. They are present in others' lives like a candle, not like a flame needing fuel. In psychological practice, Jungian therapists often encourage cultivating intentional solitude, setting aside fixed times each day to disconnect from social media, from roles, from noisy interactions, and simply be with oneself. That could be a walk without a phone, meditating in silence, journaling in solitude, or simply sitting watching the sunset without doing anything. In doing so, you allow the mind to rest from the need to react, to perform. You return to the most primordial state of consciousness, mere being. In solitude, you learn the art of listening, not just listening to yourself, but to life itself. You begin to hear the wind as a whisper, the heartbeat as the rhythm of life, and silence as the soul's song. Solitude is no longer absence, but presence at its highest level. True power does not lie in how many people are by your side, but in the ability to stand firm when all have left. When you know how to live alone without loneliness, you become a self-sustaining source of energy. And perhaps that is the pinnacle of the spiritual journey Jung spoke of. You no longer seek comfort in the crowd, but recognize the presence of the divine in your own stillness. Then, you no longer need to prove anything. You simply are here, and that is enough. In the end, what you seek has never been out of reach. It is right there in how you are present with yourself, in the small choice between a deep breath and a screen scroll, between honesty with your heart and yielding to old inertia. The path to maturity does not demand you become someone else. It only demands you stop betraying yourself. From there, the outer world is no longer an imposing stage, but a space for you to construct meaning. See each day as an encounter with the one who will journey with you for life, that is yourself. Rewrite the rhythm of attention, guard energy like a quiet vow, and step into life with eyes that know how to see. In doing so, you do not just improve, you transmute your life. And then, on a very ordinary morning, you will realize life is unfolding to the measure of your inner world, no longer the other way around. Have you ever smiled in a crowd while knowing full well that life over there doesn't belong to you? We spend our entire lives pleasing others, becoming the right version that society expects. But the more perfect we become on the outside, the more lost we feel inside. Jung believed that when you don't choose yourself, you fall into the hands of the collective unconscious. Habits, praises, the shoulds and musts. You live like a smiling shell, but empty. When you choose to turn inward, you begin to remove the social mask that Jung spoke of and see the shadow, the part you've always feared to confront. It is precisely in that dark realm that the seed of the true self is found. That is the beginning of the individuation journey, returning to your most whole, free, and authentic self. So, how can focusing on yourself help you stop wasting your life? And what does this mean in the individuation journey, the path Jung called the journey to the self? In this video, I will take you deep into the inner world, where your forgotten parts are still silently waiting to be recognized. This is not superficial self-care advice, but a true return, turning inward to reconnect with yourself. You may feel disoriented, bewildered, or even afraid, because this journey is not for those who want safety. It is for those who want to be real. The question is, are you ready to turn back and truly choose yourself? Number 1. Recognizing the false self and self-betrayal. There is a kind of pain no one sees, but everyone has felt. The pain of realizing you're living a life that's not your own. Not because you haven't tried, but because you've tried in the wrong direction, outward instead of inward. From a very early age, we learn to become the acceptable version, knowing how to behave, what to say, when to smile, and how to hide what isn't allowed to show. And then, as the years pass, we forget where the real self ends and the role begins. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social mask we wear to survive among the crowd. It helps us adapt, be loved, and be recognized. But the problem is, the more perfectly it fits, the easier it is to forget the real face beneath it. We begin to define ourselves by titles, appearances, cleverness, or the image others want to see. We learn to smile through pain, to nod when the heart protests. Then that habit hardens into a skin, a gentle betrayal repeated every day. Have you ever wondered why, when you're alone, you feel empty and exhausted, even though on the surface everything seems fine? That is the sign of disconnection from the true self, when the false self takes over the mind. Jung once said that when you live to please others, you are trading away the most precious thing, honesty with your soul. Think of the woman who always appears strong, always fine, always helping everyone, always smiling. She doesn't realize that every time she holds back tears, she is burying deeper the vulnerable part of herself that needs to be loved. Or the man who is always busy, always has reasons not to feel, because if he stops, he will have to face his deepest fear, the fear of seeing himself as empty. We all have our own ways to avoid confronting the true self, with work, social media, people-pleasing habits, or even sarcasm. But the more we run, the deeper we sink into the mud of pretense. The false self is not just the mask you wear for others. It is also the lie you tell yourself. You tell yourself you're fine, that everything is good, that just a little more and you'll be happy. But deep inside, you know you're exhausted. You don't hate the job or the people. You're tired of suppressing your true self to keep performing. In Jungian psychology, this is the split between the ego and the self. The ego is the part you are conscious of, the part that thinks, I am me. But the self is greater, broader, the center of your entire psyche, containing potential, intuition, and inner truth. When the ego dominates, you live only half a life, always chasing the image of who you should be, forgetting who you are. Jung called this the existential tragedy of modern man, losing the soul in an endless chase for societal recognition. You can see it everywhere. On social media, people compete to showcase their most admirable version, the perfect meal, the ideal relationship, the flawless smile. But behind the screen, how many sit in silence, wondering why they feel empty amid a sea of praise? Jung once said, "Nothing is more dangerous than identifying oneself with one's ideal image. When you try to become the model, you kill the real person, the one who knows mistakes, knows fear, knows weakness, but also knows feeling, knowing love, knowing how to live. Self-betrayal begins with small things. When you say yes, while your heart wants to say no. When you stay in a relationship just because you're afraid of loneliness. When you compliment someone while choking on resentment. When you tell yourself, "I'll do what I love later," and never start. Each time, a part of your soul closes off. Jung called this the fragmentation of the psyche, the process in which parts of you are pushed into the unconscious because they are not accepted. The more you pretend, the more you shatter. The courage here lies not in conquering the world, but in daring to remove what is not real, daring to live naked before yourself, daring to say, "I'm not okay, I'm afraid, I'm tired, I don't want to pretend anymore." Because in the moment you are honest, you take the first step in the healing process. Remember, the false self can help you survive, but it cannot help you live. You may be loved for your mask, but you can only be truly understood and connected when you live with your real face. People don't leave you because you're not perfect. They leave because they can't bear it when you start being real. But it is precisely then that the natural filtering of the soul occurs, and those who remain are the ones who see you with their hearts. Perhaps the most painful part of the awakening process is not losing others, but losing the false version you once believed was me. But it is exactly when it collapses that your true self begins to breathe. And from that breath, a real life begins. Not a perfect life, but a life that means something. Number 2, beginning the journey inward. When the mask falls away, the first thing you confront is not light, but emptiness. A strange silence, both terrifying and mesmerizing. It is like after years of playing a role, you are suddenly called onto the stage without a script, without anyone directing what to say. And that is precisely the beginning moment of the inward journey, the path that Carl Jung called the way to individuation, the journey to becoming your true self. Turning inward is not a comfortable trip. It has no sunshine or blooming flowers, no soothing background music like the healing videos we often see. It is a journey of deconstructing the ego, peeling away layers of beliefs, layers of illusions that you have carried since birth. Jung said, "No enlightenment comes from imagining figures of light. Light comes only when one dares to make the darkness conscious." When you turn inward, the first thing you see is not peace, but chaos. Your mind begins to echo forgotten voices. Who have I been living for? What do I really want? Am I happy, or just pretending to be? Those questions are the gateway to the unconscious, the place Jung believed holds all the repressed, denied parts of the human soul. And it is precisely there that you will find both your shadow and your light. Many people fear going inward because they think there's only pain there. But pain is not the enemy. It is the guide. It is like a map pointing to unseen wounds. A woman once said in therapy, "I don't know who I am if I'm not the one who endures well." That statement silenced the room. Because in truth, so many people live like her, identifying themselves with roles instead of the self. Going inward means daring to ask, if I'm not the title, the mother, the wife, the child, who am I? That question shatters every illusion, but it is also from there that the true self begins to be born. This journey is not linear. It is a cycle of dissolution and rebirth. Each time you see a shadow part within yourself, envy, anger, the desire for power, the fear of abandonment, and instead of judging, you accept it, you have taken another step on the path of individuation. Jung called it the integration of the conscious and unconscious. For only when you embrace your ugly parts do you become truly whole. There is a story from Jung about a dream he analyzed. A man dreamed of falling into a dark pit, and at the bottom he saw a giant serpent coiled around a shining jewel. Jung said the serpent symbolizes the unconscious, the fears, and the jewel is the true self. Only when you dare to descend into the dark pit, to face your own serpent, can you touch the jewel. The unconscious is never the enemy. It is the guarded treasure. For the modern person, going inward can begin very simply, by sitting in silence for 10 minutes a day without holding the phone, by writing down your truest thoughts without editing, or simply by pausing when the mind wants to react, to ask, which part of me is speaking right now? It may be the inner child who was once abandoned, who longed to be seen, heard, and loved. When you listen to it, without chasing it away or judging, you are healing your inner timeline. Jung called this dialoguing with the unconscious, a dialogue not with reason, but with intuition and honesty. Sometimes it comes through dreams, through strange emotions, through memories thought forgotten. A man once dreamed of being lost in an old house, searching endlessly for an exit. After many therapy sessions, he realized the house was his mind, full of locked rooms storing unopened wounds. When he began to dare enter each room, to turn on the light, his real-life anxiety gradually faded. Perhaps you too are standing before such a door, the door leading into your own inner house. If there is a moment in this writing that makes you pause and see yourself in it, leave a sign, a word, a thought, or just a deep breath, because who knows, that small honesty might become the light guiding someone else's journey. Going inward is not escaping the world, but learning to return to the center of the self, so that from there you live more authentically with the outer world. When you begin to understand that everything you hate in others is a reflection of what you haven't yet seen in yourself, you stop blaming and start taking responsibility. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That is the turning point. When we stop seeing the world as the enemy and start seeing it as a mirror." But the truth is, going inward has no clear destination. There is no map to follow, no one who can walk it for you. Each person is their own labyrinth, and the only key is absolute honesty with oneself. At one point, we stop avoiding. We begin to look, then accept. Because only when you dare to look do you begin to integrate. And when you integrate, you cease the division between good me and bad me, loving me and hating me. You become a unified whole, a free soul. Number 3, confronting the shadow. When you begin to go deeper inward, you will realize that not everything inside you is cute, gentle, or lovable. There are buried dark fragments, nameless rages, denied desires, memories compressed like ice at the bottom of the mind. And this is the moment Jung called confronting the shadow. The true turning point of the awakening journey is not in finding the light, but in daring to look straight into the darkness within yourself. The shadow is the part we don't want to admit is ours. It contains everything we've been taught to disown: selfishness, envy, lust, weakness, fear, arrogance, the bad thoughts we never dare voice. The problem is, the more we try to deny it, the more power the shadow has to control us, silently, but absolutely. Think of someone who always claims to be kind, gentle, good-hearted. But as soon as someone doesn't act as expected, they explode, blame, or withdraw into wounded silence. That is how the shadow operates. It hides behind the mask of morality, waiting for the moment you weaken to rise. Or another person who always appears confident, strong, but inside is driven by the fear of being belittled. He displays power not because he is strong, but because he fears seeing himself as small. Jung called this projection, when we see in others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The more intensely you hate someone, the more you should ask, what part of me are they reflecting that I dare not see? The shadow exists not only in individuals, but in the collective unconscious as well. Society teaches us to suppress emotions, hide flaws, and paint everything rosy. We are encouraged to positive eyes every pain, pushing the shadow ever deeper into the unconscious. And then it erupts as depression, anxiety, disorders, aggression, or a nameless emptiness. Jung once warned, "What you deny will dominate you." If you are not conscious of your shadow, it will live for you, decide for you, love for you, and destroy for you. Confronting the shadow does not mean fighting it. Jung never said we must exterminate the dark part within. On the contrary, he believed the shadow is the soul's greatest teacher. Just as a seed only sprouts in the dark soil, the soul only grows when it dares to pass through the inner night. The problem is, most people are afraid. Because when you dare look at that shadowy part, you don't just see anger or fear, you see the truth. And truth is often raw, sometimes so painful that you want to turn and run. That is what Jung called making the shadow conscious. When you can say, "I am envious, I fear abandonment, sometimes I want to be better than others," the shadow loses its power. It becomes a part of you, no longer controlling you from the unconscious. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the raw energy of the soul waiting to be shaped. In every fear is the potential for courage. In every anger is the energy for self-assertion. In every sadness is the seed of compassion. Confronting the shadow demands absolute honesty. It cannot happen in noise, but only in the profound stillness of the inner self. You may find yourself contradictory, chaotic, and disoriented, but don't rush to fix it. Jung once likened the psyche to a wild forest, and entering it is stepping into a place without a map. Every light you carry will go out, forcing you to learn to see in the dark. If you've ever gone through a dark phase, loss, crisis, separation, or depression, don't rush to call it failure. Jung saw it as a manifestation of the transformative process. The old ego is collapsing, so the true ego can be born. Like a snake that must shed its skin to grow, the soul must shed old perceptions to evolve. But that process hurts, because you don't just lose others, you lose the familiar version of yourself. Sometimes, in the darkest moment, you think you're disintegrating, but in truth, you're being reborn. Jung said, "No enlightenment comes without passing through darkness. One who does not know their own shadow will never see true light." The shadow doesn't destroy you, it only destroys your illusions. And when the illusions collapse, you have space to rebuild the true soul. The journey of confronting the shadow has no immediate rewards, but it is the gateway to freedom. When you no longer fear yourself, you are no longer easily manipulated by others. When you understand your anger, you know how to transform it into strength. When you see your fear, you know to embrace it instead of letting it control you. That is true spiritual maturity, learning to live in peace with both the light and darkness within. And then, when you emerge from that night realm, you are no longer the old person. You are deeper, quieter, more real. You begin to see beauty in imperfection, grace in the cracks, yourself not just as sparkling light, but as darkness that knows how to love. Number 4. The necessary solitude. After you dare to step through your own darkness, something strange will happen. Solitude. Not the empty solitude of the abandoned, but the profound solitude of the soul being reborn. This is not a stage everyone understands, but Jung called it the necessary solitude to become oneself. When you begin to live authentically, when the layers of masks fall away, when the shadow has been recognized, a new space opens up. Silent, vast, and sometimes very frightening. Solitude arises not because you have no one, but because you no longer belong to the old place. You look around and realize that those who were once your haven no longer speak the same language as you. Conversations suddenly become shallow, and relationships that were once warm now feel suffocating. You begin to feel lost in your own familiar world. And if you don't understand what's happening, you'll think you're losing everything. But Jung would tell you, no, you are simply being separated so that you can return. Solitude is the stage where the soul reclaims its space. A woman in therapy once said, "I've gotten used to living among others, so when I started living for myself, I felt like I was being punished." In truth, she wasn't being punished. She was returning to the primordial stage of the soul, where no one interferes, where the self learns to stand, breathe and feel on its own, without needing validation. The emptiness you feel when choosing yourself is not a sign of wrongness, but a sign of transformation. Just as a butterfly about to metamorphose must isolate itself in the cocoon, silent and solitary on the outside, but inside, a full rebirth is unfolding. Perhaps this is the moment for you to pause just to feel, to sense what the deepest part of you is saying right now. Sometimes it is precisely in that moment of silence that the soul finds its way home. Jung said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." When you begin to live authentically, you can no longer converse in the old languages, the stories of success, right-wrong, and norms. You begin to crave dialogues of depth, relationships without performance, silences that don't make you awkward. And while waiting for those true connections to arrive, you will have to pass through a phase of being alone. But being alone is not isolation. Being alone is being with yourself. That is the subtle difference Jung wanted us to recognize. When you can sit still without feeling empty, when you can walk alone without feeling lacking, when you can eat, read, think, feel, without needing a witness, that is when you begin to return to the center of the self. At that point, solitude is no longer the enemy, but the quiet companion that helps you listen to the soul. Perhaps you felt this too. You no longer find interest in the people who once made you laugh, no longer feel you fit in the once fun places. You feel like the world is leaving, but in truth, you are leaving the old world. Not because you're arrogant or different, but because you're stepping into a different frequency, where peace matters more than recognition, truth more than praise. In the individuation journey, solitude is the rite of passage. It teaches you what no classroom can: friendship with yourself. When you can sit in silence without fear, you've stepped into a new level of freedom. Freedom is not going wherever you want, but staying still with yourself without feeling the need to escape anywhere. A student once asked Jung, "How will I know I'm on the right path?" He replied, "When you start feeling solitude, that's the first sign. For the soul only speaks when the noise disappears. Those who dare to go the farthest are not the ones with many companions, but those who dare to walk alone when the path becomes empty." If you're in that stage where everything around seems alien, where you feel solitude even with people beside you, know that you're not lost. You're simply separating yourself from old energy layers to touch a deeper one. Solitude is the signal of change. Don't try to fill it, sit with it. In that very stillness, you will hear what the world's noise has long obscured: the voice of yourself. Number 5. Reconnecting with the self. From small actions to great awakening. After those days of learning to be alone, when solitude is no longer a wound but a space to breathe, you will begin to hear a very faint sound, like wind brushing against the window of the soul. It is the voice of the true self calling you home. If confronting the shadow is stepping through the night, then reconnecting with the self is dawn, not blinding, but warm and quiet. This is the stage Jung called the return to the self, the return to the deepest I, where the soul begins to find its natural rhythm again. Jung believed that awakening does not come from grand events, but from small actions repeated with consciousness. For the human soul does not rebirth in noise, but in seemingly meaningless moments. A slow breath, a cup of tea drunk in silence, an afternoon walk without a phone. These are the small doors leading back to the inner world. People often think you must do something grand to change a life. But Jung would smile and say, "True change begins when you learn to listen to your soul in the most ordinary things." Reconnecting with the self is the journey of relearning to live with consciousness rather than in reflex. Reflex is living by habit. You scroll when sad, work more when tired, and seek someone to fill the emptiness. Consciousness is pausing before each reflex and asking, "Am I doing this because I truly want to, or just to avoid some feeling?" That small difference is where the unconscious begins to turn into consciousness. Jung called it the alchemy of the soul. For each time you pause to question, you are transforming shadow into understanding. Sometimes reconnection begins with slowing down. In a world that always pushes us to be faster, stronger, more, slowing down is almost an act of rebellion. But it is the necessary rebellion to reclaim the soul's own rhythm. A woman once shared that she began recovering from burnout, not through vacation or yoga, but through a simple action. Each evening, she sat in the dark for a few minutes before sleep, just to breathe and feel her heartbeat. "At first I felt uncomfortable," she said, "but then I realized that heartbeat was what I'd forgotten to listen to for years." When she heard her heartbeat, she began to hear her heart. Reconnection is also the process of learning to be honest with emotions. We've grown too accustomed to rationalizing everything. I shouldn't be angry. I must be strong. I can't be weak. But emotions are not enemies to control. They are the language of the soul. Each time you suppress an emotion, you rob yourself of a deeper understanding of the self. Jung once said, "Emotions are windows opening into the unconscious." When you allow yourself to feel, You are no longer ruled by emotions, because you've made peace with them. Reconnecting with the self is also relearning the art of presence. How many times have you eaten without tasting the food, walked without knowing where you are, spoken without truly listening? In that unconsciousness, your life energy scatters. Presence is returning, gathering the scattered parts. When you wash dishes and only wash dishes, when you drink water and only drink water, when you converse and truly look into the other's eyes, that is not a small action, but meditation in life. And it is precisely in those seemingly simple moments that consciousness takes root. A miracle will happen when you begin to reconnect with yourself. The outer world also starts to change. You will realize you no longer frantically seek recognition, no longer chase someone to be loved, no longer try to prove anything. Because when you've touched the true self again, you no longer need to be seen, you see yourself. The peace Jung spoke of is not a life without turmoil, but an inner quiet strong enough to stand still amid the storm. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When you begin to reconnect, you are changing that fate. You no longer react to wounds, but act from awareness. You no longer live as one led, but as one creating their own life. The most beautiful thing is, you don't need to be perfect to start. You just need honesty and patience. Each small action, journaling, walking, meditating, turning off the phone, saying no when tired, crying when needed, is a stone placed on the path home. Jung called them the small rituals of consciousness. They don't change you overnight, but they awaken the flow of life within. And bit by bit, you will see yourself return not as before, but as the you that has long been waiting to come home. Number 6. Liberation from the collective unconscious. When you begin to reconnect with the self, when presence becomes clear, when you learn to listen to the inner voice, another fog begins to dissipate, the fog of the collective unconscious. This is one of Carl Jung's most profound discoveries, and the most subtle prison in which humanity lives without knowing it. The collective unconscious is the vast repository of beliefs, prejudices, fears, and behavioral patterns that humanity has accumulated over thousands of years. It exists like an invisible web, shaping how we think, feel, love, and live, not because we choose, but because we have been programmed. From childhood, we breathe the air of the collective unconscious. You must excel to be accepted. You must succeed to have value. Those seemingly harmless phrases seep into the subconscious, then grow into inner commands we dare not disobey. We call them reality, life's rules, common sense. But in truth, they are products of the collective psyche. Jung once said, "Our freedom does not lie outside us, but within us." The trap of the collective unconscious lies in making you believe you're deciding for yourself, while in reality, you're just reacting to collective beliefs. You choose a career because it's safe. You choose a partner because everyone says they're good. You suppress emotions because adults shouldn't be weak. Every such decision is painted with rational language, but its root is the fear of separation from the herd. Jung called this herd mentality when the individual loses their unique identity and dissolves into values worshipped by the collective. The collective unconscious influences not just individuals, but entire cultures. It creates archetypes, models that everyone unconsciously copies: the nurturing mother, the strong man, the perfect woman, the obedient child. When we don't realize they are just molds, we try to squeeze ourselves into them, and suffering begins here. Jung said, "The archetypes are not at fault. The fault lies in humans believing they must become them." Liberation from the collective unconscious does not mean rebelling against society, but awakening within that very society. It is recognizing which beliefs truly come from your lived experience and which were implanted by others. Try asking yourself, do I want this because I truly want it, or because I was taught to want it? That question, if asked with enough honesty, will collapse many illusions you once took as foundations. A very everyday example. You feel guilty for resting, even when your body is exhausted. Why? Because in the collective unconscious, rest is linked to laziness, while working to exhaustion is linked to value. So, even knowing you're tired, you continue, just to maintain the image of being worthy of respect. But that very image is eroding you. Liberation from the collective unconscious is daring to break those false identifications, daring to say, I don't need to exhaust myself to prove my worth. A sign that you're escaping the influence of the collective unconscious is that you begin to feel alienated. No longer swept into the crowd, you see what everyone once called normal as absurd. You see noise, shallowness, superficiality, and in that strangeness, you begin to see the true nature of the world, not to blame, but to understand. Jung said, "One who escapes herd mentality does not become arrogant, but humble, for they see the depth of the collective unconscious within themselves." Liberation from the collective unconscious also means taking full responsibility for your life. No one to blame, no system or circumstances to cling to. You understand that most limits you feel come not from outside, but from collective beliefs you've absorbed. When you dare question those absolute truths, you begin to open the door to inner freedom. However, this freedom has a price. You will have to go against the current. You will be misunderstood, criticized, and sometimes seen as strange. The truly free don't need to assert their difference. They simply live from inner truth, and that truth shines on its own. In the depths of Jung's philosophy, liberation from the collective unconscious is not denying the world, but awakening in it. It is when you both flow with the crowd and remain conscious of your steps. It is when you can listen to others' opinions without dissolving. It is when you're no longer controlled by musts, but act from true understanding. By now, perhaps you've heard enough of the world's noise and caught a glimpse of your own whisper. The rest is not more theory, but a quiet decision. From today, you will stop abandoning yourself. When standing before the mirror, you don't seek the person others expect to see. You seek the honest gaze waiting to be recognized. When stepping out onto the street, you no longer perform for an invisible audience. You step as if already home. If there is a simple definition for not wasting your life, it is daring to live each day as an honest answer. Not an answer that pleases everyone, but one that quiets your heart. That quiet is not loud, needs no proof. It simply radiates like the warmth of one who has returned to their own seat. And when the door closes, you will understand. You've never lacked light. You just needed to turn toward it. The rest, let the soul lead the way.